What are Sweet Ganyu's biggest pros and cons? That's what I'm here to tell you today. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. To begin, I'd like to talk about one of Ganyu's most positive qualities. She has a ton of effective versatility packed within her. This Coco Goat adapts herself to any task there is diligently, much like how she'll adapt herself to not sleep for 3 days if there's work to get done. Essentially, she has many different team combinations that she can use, which makes her versatile. Okay, cool, but being versatile on its own doesn't mean much if you aren't realistically going to use many of those different teams. Well, in this goat's case, she has comps which deal with certain scenarios better than others that offer varying levels of skill ceilings. For example, if you're in a heavily groupable situation such as in theater, you use freeze. If you're in a boss scenario where the target isn't overly stagger heavy, you use burn melt. You're dealing with stupidly stagger heavy bosses, traditional melt. You want to play her as a support in mono cryo, then Ayaka mono cryo it is. Those are just her main teams. That's not even running over her more niche applications like Child Ganyu Freeze. There is a GOAT team for literally every possible scenario that you might find yourself in. I personally find myself using Burn Melt the most, because it's effective in pretty much every situation. I also like that you can use both Ganyu's burst and her charge attacks in it, because the burning aura is enough to sustain both getting melts. I find that this specific team is really good for shield breaking abysses too, such as when the Inquisitus Baptist is around. There are some other neat little perks to using Ganyu in your team as well, such as the fact that she's a bow user. That Eon Blight Drake in 12-3-2 stands no chance against this goat, assuming you actually manage to get there before smashing your keyboard after having to deal with Tenebra's Papilla. If you're somebody who's looking for a challenge, then you can always turn to her Speedrunner Melt team. This was mostly made for C6 players, but it'll work fine for C0 enjoyers too. Hard to play, but worth the effort if you can manage. No matter what state your account is in, you should be able to put together a good team for this lovely goat. I would also like to point out how every couple of months, she gains a new teammate. Last time it was Emily and her Burn Melt teams. Personally, I think that Nahita's still better for the Coco Goat because of that juicy A1 EM share passive, but the viability is still there. You could argue that Shieldren has made it into some of Ganyu's teams as well, but I generally prefer Kazuha for Melt because he's able to spread pyro application in a large area with his burst. The DJ Cat is most definitely a part of her mono cryo teams though. Her reliability in any situation is one of Ganyu's absolute biggest pros in my opinion. Then we must discuss how easy it is to access this unit. The bar to entry is made super low when it comes to building her. Both of her main best installed sets are 2 really old strong boxable 4 pieces, Blizzard Strayer and Wanderer's Troop. Shoot man, you'll get a crud ton of troop pieces passively over time from just leveling up your characters, since you get them from claiming boss rewards, so her set should be easy enough to put together. Weapon options? She has like 5 billion. Much like Child, but to a bit of a lesser extent, whenever a new 5-star bow comes out, consider it a Ganyu buff. There are some bows which she can't use as well, such as Thundering Pulse's passive being useless for her, but then you have the likes of Polar Star, Aqua Simulacra, Amos Bow, and the First Great Magic propping her up, or even Elegy for support you. She herself is not an inherently difficult character to understand or play. Some of her teams can be difficult to execute, such as Shenhe Meltyu, but generally Ganyu herself is not a hard unit to play. For her DPS playstyle, it's as simple as holding down the charge attack button and shooting when her arrow fully charges up. Yep. I will say that on mobile, it could feel clunkier due to having to aim and move around at the same time. However, far from being hard to understand mechanically, anybody can pick up this unit no matter their skill level and understand what she's supposed to do. She has a taunt which is nice in 2 to 3 target scenarios, and you can always circumvent difficulty by using a shielder with her. It's much less of a damage loss for her than it would be for other DPSs, typically speaking. And as for support Ganyu, well, you basically just use her burst and swap off. Doesn't get much easier than that. If you ever see one, which is really nice for DPS U2 by the way, then you can also fire off a charge attack every now and then to restore a bit of energy while also reducing enemy cryo res, so that her burst can do a little more damage. Neat stuff. To expand upon her supportive capabilities, if you're not interested in using her as an on-field DPS, then you can always use her solely for that burst of hers. Essentially, whenever any character stands inside of that big cryo ring, they'll gain 20% cryo damage bonus thanks to the Goat Save 4. This makes her a fantastic slot in for mono cryo teams, which is a very solid high investment boss killing option when playing cryo in single target. You'll find that this is one of support U's best in slot use cases. Otherwise, she's a decent off-fielder in general for a variety of different teams. She doesn't have to be the main DPS in Freeze, you can use her solely as an off-fielder, and when Ayaka's burst is ticking, you can fire off more Ganyu charge attacks during its uptime, especially nice if you have the Goat C1 to reduce enemy cryo res. Why argue over who's better when you can just use both in the same team? She has cool synergy with the likes of Ayato's burst as well, which is another large, circular burst which applies cryo upon Hydro. If you're in an AoE situation, then Freeze shall rain upon all of your foes. She's definitely not a must-have support per se, but this playstyle definitely has its fun uses. the Overlord! No, not that Overlord. But we love you, Caesar. Ahem. The Overlord! Ganyu is an overworld legend. I won't dwell on this for too long, because it's not really anything to do with her meta value, but it'd be foolish of me to not mention how comfortable this character is in the overworld. Characters which are burst-based like Raiden feel incredibly overkill in the overworld, and sometimes you have situations like Arla where she keeps burning the damn grass. Ganyu's charge attacks can be shot at any time with no strings attached, with excellent range. Her AoE shots make her fantastic for balloon-based chest minigames, and she is generally one of the most exploration-friendly DPSs in the game. Definitely something to consider if you're big on exploring. As splendid as our sweet, hard-working Kokogoat may be, we do unfortunately have to speak of her flaws. One of those being that she's quite simply a very outclassed DPS. The chronicled label is there for a reason. I do think people downplay her way too much these days just because she isn't at the absolute top of the meta like she used to be. She's not that bad. Calm down. However, it's undeniable that she's certainly past her prime and doesn't hit as hard as current modern day DPSs. She has so much going for her. It really is as simple as the damage ceiling has raised significantly since her time in the meta. Sure, she has fantastic burn melt teams, but replace Ganyu here with Mualani and you'll be clearing 2 times faster at the very least. I wouldn't pick her up over any current day DPS. Pretty much any damage dealer from Fontaine or Notlan is gonna totally trounce the Kokogoat's performance. Once again, I think this character is doomed way too much these days, but one of her biggest flaws is indeed that her damage simply doesn't keep up as well as it used to anymore. And let's just be real for a sec. None of us are playing Ganyu against a Hydro Tulpa unless we really hate ourselves very, very much. Even with a shielder like Zhongli, you're gonna find yourself hating everything if you try to put her up against some of the really stupidly insane bosses in the Abyss. Enjoy playing shieldless Ganyu against the Tenebra's Papilla, folks. Typically speaking, this shouldn't be a huge deal breaker for you. Shielders exist for a reason. The only 2 fights where I think that won't save you is the Hydro Tulpa and the Tenebra's Papilla, which is pretty annoying since in this Abyss, after the Papilla, there's the Eon Blight Drake in the final 12-3-2 chamber, who's an excellent matchup for Ganyu. There's the Copper Duo too, but to be honest, you shouldn't be thinking of using DPS Ganyu there in the first place. That thing has a stupidly high amount of cryo res. And finally, Ganyu struggles from the curse of being a cryo character. It genuinely sucks that Sit Lolly did not buff her. All that Hoyo had to do was add a cryo res shred to her A4 so that she could support teams of her own element as well. But nope, forward melt and Nuvi buffs only. Let's just ignore the characters that genuinely need the help, why don't we? Excellent thinking, Hoyoverse. It would have been a perfect synergy. A shielder that buffs Melt and has fantastic EM scaling sounds just right for Melt Ganyu teams. Alas, reality is often disappointing. She does get a new teammate every now and then, so it's not all bad, but it really does sting to see such an obvious buff fly over Hoyo's heads. I guess this hurts because I myself am a big Ganyu enjoyer. A wild shame. Being Cryo in general does hold her back a bit. For example, it's excellent that she's able to be an off-field support, but not many teams really need the off-field cryo application in sub-DPS. It's not like being another element would entirely save her, since Ayato's burst is similar but Hydro, yet even then, he doesn't see much use. So it's not only on her being Cryo, but it's certainly a contributing factor. I think that if the element ever gets some major buffs, she will indeed be a part of them, just because she tends to get passively buffed every now and then already. However, I doubt that she'll ever be at the absolute top of the meta like she was before, which ultimately, that's completely fine. If you were there during her prime, you'll know that she was one of the best characters in the game for nearly 2 whole years before falling off. That was plenty of time to be the greatest. Don't pull for her expecting her to get majorly better in the future. Sure, she has the potential to, but because of the raised ceilings, she'll always be 2 steps behind. If you're not happy with her current state right now, then I'd avoid her. Otherwise, she still definitely has some value to bring to the table. Ganyu is one of my favorite Genshin characters of all time, and that fact still remains to this day. I don't even know how long it's been since she was initially added to my top 5 favorites. She's been resting in my top 3 for ages now. I bought her skin on day 1, I have her scale figure, she was my 2nd ever triple crown, and I mained her before I got my C6 R1 Farina. I have a C2 R1 Shenhe and everything too. Trust me man, I'm a Cryo connoisseur. If Cryo has no fans, then I shall remain as its only fan. I have Xian Yun at C2 and the goat herself at C1 R1. Funny how I've got the whole family trio at a decent level of investment. Well, all 3 are my top 5 favorite Genshin characters of all time, so that checks out. I have nothing but affection for this character. Even if she's not meta anymore, I don't care. This is a character that I'll always hold close to me. Sure, she's certainly not as impressive as she was back in the day, but people are certainly far too harsh on her. If you invest, then she will do pretty well for you. It's just a simple case of investing into literally any modern character to the same extent will yield out much better results. Definitely let me know about what you think about Ganyu down below in the comments. Are you planning to pull for her? I'd love to know. Friendly reminder as always that I have a ZZZ second channel. Head on over and subscribe if you're interested in some fun, silly ZZZ content. Hopefully this video was able to tell you Ganyu's biggest pros and cons. This has been Juice, signing out, and remember that a glass of cocoa goat milk a day keeps sadness away.